They arrived carrying clipboards, wearing fake badges, and tossing out threats, convinced they could intimidate a man into surrendering his home. What they didn't realize was that 6 Navy SEALs were already on their way to his driveway. The noise came sharp and deliberate, 3 heavy knocks pounding against the front door of Calvin Dunmore's house in Concord, North Carolina. It wasn't late, but it wasn't early either. Just after 6 p.m., when most families were winding down, dinners cooking on stoves, televisions flickering in living rooms. Calvin had been in the kitchen rinsing off a dish when the pounding echoed through the house. Something about it was off. It wasn't the easy knock of a friendly neighbor. It was firm, demanding. He dried his hands on a towel and moved toward the door, the echo of that knock still pressing against his chest. Calvin wasn't a man who spooked easily. At 44, he had faced his share of hardships. Money struggles, raising children, even losing his marriage. But when he pulled open that door, his evening turned into something he never expected. 2 men stood there, dressed in tactical vests marked with bold white lettering, HOA Enforcement Division. They looked like officials, radios at their sides, clipboards in hand, faces hard as stone. The taller one, bald with a scar slicing above his eyebrow, spoke first. "Mr. Dunmore." Calvin blinked. "Yeah, that's me." "You're in violation of neighborhood code," the man announced in a stiff, memorized tone. "By HOA policy, you are required to vacate this property within 48 hours. Calvin let out a short, incredulous laugh, the kind people give when they hear a bad joke. "Vacate? What are you talking about? I own this house. Paid off the mortgage 7 years ago. I just talked to the HOA president at last month's meeting." The second man, shorter and bulkier, wearing mirrored sunglasses even in the shade, stepped forward. "Doesn't matter. You're out of compliance. We've been authorized to serve notice. You've got 2 days to clear out." For a second, Calvin thought this had to be some twisted prank. He glanced again at their patches, HOA Enforcement Division. He'd lived in this neighborhood nearly 10 years. He'd seen plenty of notices before, late dues, trash cans left on the curb, grass growing too long. But never armed-looking men telling someone to abandon their home. "This makes no sense," Calvin said firmly. "If I had a problem with the HOA, they'd send me a letter. Worst case, I'd get a fine. Nobody shows up in tactical gear." The taller man leaned forward just enough to make the air feel heavier. "Sir, we're not here to argue. We're here to enforce. You can leave quietly, or we can escalate." Calvin's jaw tightened. He wasn't someone who looked for fights, but he wasn't blind either. His father always used to say, real authority doesn't need to prove itself. And something about these 2 didn't add up. Their badges looked cheap, like they'd been printed and laminated at a copy shop. Their clipboards carried generic forms, no HOA letterhead, no signatures. Even their radios, he noticed, weren't switched on. "Let me ask you something," Calvin said, crossing his arms. "Who exactly sent you? What's the president's name? And what violation am I supposedly breaking?" The shorter man shifted uncomfortably, irritation flashing across his face. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. We're giving you a chance to walk away on your own terms. Most people would take it." Calvin locked his eyes on them, the silence between them growing thicker. The tension felt like it was creeping through the air. These weren't HOA officials. They weren't even tied to any real agency. They were impostors. But the problem was, they were standing on his porch trying to shove him out of his own house. "You 2 need to leave my property," Calvin said at last, his tone calm but cutting. "Right now." The tall one smirked. "Or what? You'll call the cops and tell them the HOA knocked on your door? Go ahead. See how quickly they show up for that." Calvin's chest tightened, not from fear, but from anger. He knew this wasn't just a mistake. It was a con, a scheme meant to scare him out of what he had worked so hard to build. His eyes flicked past them toward the street, hoping maybe a neighbor was around. Nothing. Just the hum of a distant lawnmower and a dog barking down the block. The shorter man dropped his voice, almost a growl. Final warning. 48 hours. After that, we'll deal with it our way. Calvin didn't move, just kept staring at them until they finally turned and walked toward a black SUV waiting at the curb. He closed the door and locked it, his hands unsteady, not with fear, but with fury. He didn't yet realize that reinforcements were already on the way. Old friends who would change this night in ways those impostors never saw coming. But trouble wasn't finished knocking. This was only the start. Calvin didn't sit after shutting the door. Instead, he paced his living room, his mind spinning. Who would dare show up dressed like officials, wearing fake patches, and threatening to throw him out of his own house? He pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over the HOA president's number, then stopped. Something told him not to call, not yet. Those men wanted him shaken, wanted him panicked, dialing for help. He refused to give them that win. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the blinds open and looked toward the black SUV was still parked at the curb. The two men hadn't gone anywhere. One sat behind the wheel, while the other tapped away on a tablet, eyes locked on the house, watching, waiting. Calvin muttered under his breath, "Yeah, real official." He pulled the door open again and stepped onto the porch, determined not to let them think he was intimidated. "Hey," he called out, his voice carrying loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "Mind telling me who exactly sent you here?" The SUV door opened and the taller man climbed out, his boots thudding against the pavement as he walked forward with a slow, deliberate stride. "We already told you," he said curtly. "We're here on behalf of the HOA." Calvin shook his head. "No, you didn't tell me anything. You tossed out a line and expected me to believe it. So let's try again. A name. Which board member gave you this order?" The man stopped at the edge of the lawn, his jaw tightening. "You're asking too many questions for someone who's about to lose his house." That was enough. Calvin stepped off his porch, closing the space between them until only a few feet remained. "You picked the wrong door," he said evenly. "I've been paying into this. I've been part of this neighborhood since before you even knew it existed. If the board had an issue, I'd get an email, a letter, maybe a sit-down meeting. Not two guys in fake vests trying to shove me out." The passenger climbed out of the SUV then, mirrored shades catching the light as he approached. He yanked a paper off his clipboard and shoved it toward Calvin. "Here. Read it. You'll see we're not bluffing." Calvin snatched it and glanced down. The thing was laughable, no letterhead, no seal, no signatures. Just a plain typed form with a couple of bold phrases: violation of Code 14B. Non-compliance. Mandatory eviction. It looked like something copied off a free template from the internet. Calvin smirked. "You seriously expect anyone to fall for this trash?" He waved the paper in the air. "This isn't even worth the ink." The shorter man stiffened. "You don't get it, do you? We don't need you to believe us. We just need you to pack your things and leave." Most people don't fight it. They're too scared. They don't want the headache. "Then you came to the wrong house," Calvin snapped back. "Because I don't scare easy." For a moment, silence pressed between them, heavy and sharp. The tall one leaned closer, dropping his voice. "Look, man. We can do this the polite way, or we can do it the hard way. Nobody wants the hard way." Calvin didn't move, his eyes locked, his heart pounding harder, not with fear, but adrenaline. These men weren't just con artists. They were predators, relying on intimidation to break people down. But Calvin wasn't built to fold. He'd fought real battles in life, the kind that left scars. And he wasn't about to surrender over a fake eviction slip. "You set one foot on this porch again," Calvin said, his voice hard as stone, "and I promise you'll regret it." The shorter man sneered. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops? They'll take hours to show, and by then we'll already be gone." Calvin's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "I won't need the cops." The tall one tilted his head, intrigued. "Oh yeah? Then who you got?" Calvin's eyes flicked toward the end of the street. Headlights appeared, 3 vehicles turning the corner, rolling slowly down the block. At first, the impostors didn't notice. But Calvin did. He knew those cars. He knew the men inside. His backup wasn't a what. It was a who. The taller man glanced over his shoulder, frown tugging at his face. "Friends of yours?" Calvin folded his arms. "You could say that." The SUVs stopped, engines shutting down. One by one, the doors opened, and 6 men stepped out. Each carried a presence that couldn't be mistaken. Broad frames, sharp eyes, and a way of standing that said they'd seen more than most men could imagine. Jonas Redden. Marcus and Vale. Pierce Lockhart. Damian Crowell. Silas Trent. Vaughn Kessler. Every one of them a former Navy SEAL. Every one of them Calvin's brothers in arms. The tall impostor's smirk finally cracked. But the showdown was far from finished. It was only about to escalate. The moment Calvin's friends emerged, the air shifted. You could feel it in the way the impostors stiffened, their earlier swagger shrinking fast. This wasn't a group of buddies dropping by for a drink. This was a wall of muscle, discipline, and quiet authority advancing down the driveway. Jonas Redden, tall, streaks of gray in his beard and a stare sharp enough to freeze a room, was the first to speak. "Cal, what's going on?" His voice was calm, but steel-edged every word. Calvin gestured toward the so-called enforcers. "These clowns claim they're from the HOA. Told me I've got 2 days to clear out of my own house." The men exchanged quick looks. Pierce Lockhart let out a sharp laugh that sliced through the tension. "You've got to be kidding me." Marcus and Vale stepped forward, eyes locked on the impostors. "HOA Enforcement Division, huh? That's funny, I've never heard of such a thing in my life. How about you show us some actual credentials?" The tall fake stiffened, trying to keep his composure. "This is official business. Doesn't involve you. Step aside." Jonas didn't budge. None of them did. His voice was firm. "You just made it our business." Silas Trent tilted his head, studying the patches on their vests. "Those look like they were ordered off a surplus site last week. Stitching's too clean. Gear that's really used in the field doesn't look like that." The shorter impostor adjusted his mirrored shades, snapping, "We're not here to argue about uniforms. We're here to enforce the rules." Damian Crowell crossed his arms. "Which rules?" "Go ahead, name the statute. Quote the HOA code you're enforcing. Shouldn't be hard if you're legit." The impostors hesitated. Just a couple of seconds too long. And that pause was all the confirmation the SEALs needed. Vaughn Kessler let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "These guys are bluffing so bad it hurts." Calvin, now standing a few steps behind his friends, felt relief surge through him. He hadn't been imagining it, these men were frauds. And now he had backup who could smell a lie a mile away. The tall impostor tried again, doubling down. "You don't understand how serious this is. He's in violation. He has to leave. We've got paperwork." Jonas snatched the flimsy notice from Calvin's hand and held it up for all to see. "Paperwork? This? My kid could whip this up in 10 minutes. No signatures, no legal codes, nothing binding at all. And you think anyone's buying it? The impostor's jaw tightened. The impostor's jaw clenched as he stepped closer, but Jonas didn't so much as flinch. Calvin noticed neighbors beginning to peek out from behind blinds, a few even stepping onto their porches. The tension was spreading, and curiosity was pulling people in. Pierce, never one to sugarcoat, leaned forward. "Let me ask you straight, what's the hustle here? You running a scam? Picking random houses and trying to scare folks out so you can rob them blind?" The shorter man snapped back, "Watch your mouth." "Or what?" Pierce shot back, his tone sharp. "You gonna arrest us with those toy radios? Maybe flash those bargain bin badges again?" Silas grinned, though his words carried an icy weight. "You made a serious mistake coming here. You thought you'd find someone weak enough to cave. Instead, you found a man with 6 brothers who don't back down." Calvin stepped forward, his confidence growing. "You really thought I'd believe the HOA sent you out here in combat vests with no IDs? That I'd just pack up and leave? I've worked too hard for this house. My kids grew up here. You don't get to show up and threaten me out of it." The tall impostor's mask of confidence cracked. His shoulders shifted, his stance loosening as if he realized the numbers weren't in his favor anymore. Still, he tried clinging to control. "You think this is funny, but interfering with official business is a crime." Vaughn barked out a laugh. "The only crime here is you pretending to be something you're not. And let me tell you, impersonating law enforcement comes with real time behind bars." The impostors exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't used to being confronted this directly. Calvin could see it now, their lines had been rehearsed, their intimidation carefully practiced. But stripped of their bluff, they had nothing left. Their whole script was crumbling. Jonas folded the flimsy notice in half and shoved it into the impostor's vest pocket. "Here's the deal. You've got 2 options," Jonas said flatly. "Get back in your car and drive off this street right now, or stay put and let us call the cops. Either way, this doesn't end how you imagined." The shorter impostor clenched his jaw, muttering under his breath. The taller one scanned the group, eyes darting as he calculated. Calvin could see it, he was weighing whether these men were bluffing or if they really would bring the police into it. What the impostors didn't realize was that Jonas already had his phone out, thumb hovering over the dial, ready to make the call. But just as the standoff tightened, something shifted that raised the stakes even higher. The street went eerily still. Neighbors stayed rooted on porches and behind windows, hanging on every word but too cautious to step in. Calvin stood firm behind his brothers, his heart pounding in rhythm with the silence. The impostors began to shift uneasily, their earlier bravado crumbling into defense. They hadn't counted on this many witnesses. And then, cutting through the quiet, came the deep growl of an engine. A dark pickup truck turned onto the block, headlights slicing through the haze of early evening. It rolled to a stop just a few yards behind the black SUV the impostors had arrived in. Pierce Lockhart, arms still folded across his chest, smirked. "Looks like the cavalry's here." From the driver's seat stepped Dean Morrick, another former SEAL who hadn't managed to make it on time for the reunion. He was broader than most, shoulders wide enough to block a doorway. "I'm not going anywhere. And neither are these men. So why don't you tell me the real reason you're here?" Calvin said firmly. The impostors exchanged a glance, their silence speaking louder than words. The tall one clenched his jaw, but his rehearsed lines were gone. All he had left was presence, and even that was fading. Dean's calm voice cut through. "I've seen this scam before. Fake authority, heavy intimidation. You scare just enough people into leaving, then you strip the place of valuables. Maybe even flip the property if you're bold. But here's the problem, you picked the wrong house. This man doesn't scare. And worse, you walked into a reunion of 6 Navy SEALs. That landed. Neighbors whispered across the street, phones raised higher. The impostors had thought they were predators, but now they were the ones boxed in, cornered by an audience and men who could see right through them. The tall one finally cracked, voice rising. "You're interfering with federal business. That's obstruction." Jonas barked a laugh so sharp the impostor flinched. "Federal? Now you're really reaching. The HOA isn't federal, and neither are you. You've been exposed. And the only reason you're still standing here is because we're letting you walk away." The shorter man's hand twitched near his vest as if reaching for something. Von Kessler's voice exploded, deep and commanding, "Don't move that hand." His tone froze the air. The impostor slowly lowered his arm, realizing just how badly outmatched he was. Calvin glanced around. The street had become a stage, neighbors recording, children peeking through curtains, his old brothers in arms forming a wall between him and the fakes. The tall impostor muttered something under his breath to his partner, but Jonas caught it. "We'll come back another time." Dean stepped forward, voice low but unshakable. "You won't be back. Because next time it won't just be neighbors with cameras, it'll be the police. And we'll make sure every second of this footage gets turned in." The impostors hesitated, weighing their options. Their SUV sat only a few steps away. But leaving now meant admitting defeat.